Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 80 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Episode 80. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in that time, and not too surprisingly, we go back and speak with the same guests because from their first appearance on the show, then events progress. And also, so does our awareness of what's occurring. And tonight, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome back Pippa King. And many of you, of course, will remember that Pippa has, I think, been on about 4, if not 5, previous episodes of Humanity vs. Insanity. She is, in my opinion, the country's leading researcher and campaigner into RFID and biometrics. And she is a prima facie example of what one determined individual can achieve. Now, over the years, Pippa has also been joined by other individual campaigners who have also been concerned about this issue. And Pippa certainly has the accolade of having influenced legislation with regard to biometrics. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Pippa to the show. So good evening, Pippa. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. Thank you for having me on again, Ian. It's a pleasure.
Hey, well, it's always a pleasure and very timely. I mean, we spoke about you coming on the program, about 2 weeks ago now, nearly, for this evening. And some interesting stuff has occurred in the meantime. And one is my own personal experience. So I know this might come as quite a shock to some people, but earlier this year I was persuaded to join a gym, and I did. I joined a gym in the north of England where I spend probably about, maybe a little more than 50% of my time these days, for fairly obvious reasons. And I joined up with this gym, Exercise for Less. And this seemed a remarkable package. I checked out the gym. It's a stunning facility, certainly a lot of equipment. And because I have the flexibility to go outside the rush hour, then it was very attractive. And not least, what was really attractive was the fact that it was £9.99 a month, about a third of what any other gym wanted to charge. So having used this facility for 6 months, I tried to get in the gym about 10 days ago and went to punch in my PIN number, but the keypads had been removed from the turnstile at the entrance. And I was advised that I needed to go to reception and offer my thumbprint. Well, as you can imagine, that did not sit well. So after some discussion with the management, who I have to say, if these are an example of the young generation today, may God help us, because they seem to be completely oblivious to any reason that I might have cause for concern for handing over any aspect of biometrics to a private enterprise. So I asked them if they could actually give me a guarantee that any biometrics would never be sold on. And they said, well, I can assure you that I won't do it, but I can't actually guarantee that nobody in the company will do it. So this is actually a lost leader. Getting people to sign up for gym membership is a way to get people on the books and then to get their biometrics. And what I anticipate is that over the coming weeks, months, and probably years, the likes of Exercise for Less will demand more and more biometrics because the value will not be on the revenues from monthly subscription. The value will be on the biometrics that then they can sell on to the highest bidder. So Pippa, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is a development that took me a bit by surprise. And then what really shocked me, although I shouldn't have been shocked, I guess, was the absolute intransigence of Exercise for Less. And basically they were saying, well, you got 2 choices. You either give us your biometrics, you give us your thumbprint so you can enter the gym, or you can't come in.
It's a good way to lose business, isn't it? I mean, The people that you probably spoke to might have had an experience of biometrics themselves through the school system, which is why they probably got a flippant attitude to it, because the children were just fingerprinted without any sort of discussion. And even now, with parental consent, there's scant little information on the internet other than sort of my website and the websites of the people supplying the software. But you're right. At the moment, I'm not aware of any biometric databases having been sold in the UK, but any biometric database that is in the UK at the moment is generally held by a school or by government. But increasingly, private companies and corporations are using biometrics to verify people like yourself to go in to the gym and use it. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility, because biometrics aren't included in as sensitive personal information under our Data Protection Act. In fact, in our Data Protection Act, there is no mention of the word biometric whatsoever. So it's a free-for-all at the moment. We don't know where this information is going, how valuable it's going to be, who it's going to, whether or not commercial companies are selling it on. It's a complete unknown. And one of my concerns with this is that we need to have a massive public discussion about it and quickly get some legislation in to stop anybody selling this sort of data, because we don't know where it's going to go. In fact, when we were campaigning against biometric fingerprinting in schools, we parents were in touch with a professor at Colorado University, that's it, in a guy called Terence Bolt. And he was saying in that particular state, biometric databases are bought and sold much like any other database is bought and sold. But biometric in Colorado is not considered an identification. So that's how lax it is, or can be, over there in the States. And at the moment, I don't know if that's as an identification in legislation or whether it's just generally assumed not to be an identification, but it's surely, if they're buying and selling biometric databases in the States, it will happen over here.
That's pretty much a given. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out where this is heading. At the moment, it's a thumbprint to gain access to the gym. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if within literally a matter of months, you actually have to put your thumbprint to use any of the machines. And just like an Oyster card, in London, where you swipe it to enter the tube and you swipe it to leave. And in in a scenario that I can see here, you put your thumbprint on when you start using the machine and you put your thumbprint on when you finish. The machine logs how you have performed on that machine. And then, there is a potential database here to the medical profession, to the pharmaceutical industry, and to lawyers or whatever, in terms of anyone's medical condition. And I mean, if you go to extrapolate that even further, then, if your GP has access potentially to this information, then, you could be finding yourself getting a phone call from your GP and, him saying, well, I think you need to come in here. We've been looking at your statistics that have been sent to me by the gym. And many will argue, they will say, hey, this is a great idea. Look at the benefits of this, the interactive benefits. But it seems that, people are far too willing to give up their personal data. Exercise for Less claims to have something like 300,000 members in the UK. Surely that's not 300,000 zombies that willingly give over their biometrics unquestioningly.
I wouldn't be surprised in the least whether or not they do that, Ian. But it's interesting, and the way that they will sell it to you if they do start putting sort of biometric markers on machines is by it'll interact with your Fitbit watch or your system. Many people track themselves, how many steps they walk a day, what their heart rate is, how many calories they've burnt off. I mean, I can see it myself on social media. People will post up, oh, I've just done this run and lost 700, burnt up 700 calories. But you're right, that information they will sell it like loyalty cards in shops. It's good for you. You want this information. You can track yourself. But in the back, behind all that, there's a huge amount of data being taken about you. And you're right. It could have implications for your life insurance, your health. Your doctors could have access to that. Who knows where it's going? And it's almost like we've got this, like kids in a candy shop. We've got all this data, and by verifying it with a biometric identifier, absolutely makes that data so much more valuable because it's so much more accurate, and it's not somebody else that's used your PIN to go in there and do that. The data isn't muddied. It's absolutely pure because they know it's you. And this is where biometrics is going to come in. There is that much data around, so much data, that by bringing in biometric identifiers will start to make the data credible.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned about the fact that people will link this into their biometric monitors that they wear on their wrist. I was having a conversation with Mike earlier today at UK Column, and we were talking about these wrist monitors that people are wearing, which are Bluetooth. And they're linked into a Bluetooth receiver on your computer or whatever, and you're wearing this, so you're sleeping, with either the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or whatever all around you. And there's been already a lot of research, and of course, especially the research of the likes of Barry Trower, to show that when you are sleeping in a Wi-Fi rich or radio frequency rich environment, it really messes with your sleep pattern, because it messes with your ability to actually produce the appropriate amounts of melatonin to get a decent night's rest. Which, of course, in turn, as I discussed many times before, impacts on the right brain. It keeps people absolutely locked into a physical, empirical, material version of reality, and effectively keeps them in their absolute enslavement. So it's another part of this web.
Yes, and of course, if that would be the natural progression, wasn't it, to sort of get these machines to talk to your watch, and also for them to then communicate with a central database in the premises or nationally. And of course, they won't be wired; it'll all be through Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. So essentially, when you go to the gym, each machine you've got could be a hub of radio frequency coming out at it. And it's interesting, my father's just recently bought a hearing aid. I've been given a hearing aid by the NHS. And one of the features of the hearing aid was that the hearing aid could tell him when he'd had it on or off. And he was sort of saying, has it got an RFID receiver in, or is it transmitting? And I went, I don't know, but you need to find out, because you don't want anything in your head that's transmitting a frequency to another device. And he was sort of sold this is a good thing for you. We can tell, you can monitor yourself and when the hearing aid is on and how loud you've got it. And at the moment, he just doesn't want to put it anywhere near his head. And I don't blame him. I can't, a hearing aid should just be a hearing aid. There's no need to monitor when it's switched on or off and what volume it's at. I'm sure my dad can adjust his own volume quite happily, and that's completely his business and nobody else's.
Yeah, but they're preparing for the next generation that actually won't be able to think for themselves, because that will have been educated out of them, because they'll rely on all the devices around them. Well, just before we move away from exercise for less, this caught my eye. This is their online presence, and this is the one of the graphics there. Because it's in you, it's in us, which actually is just obviously marketing nonsense, unless there is, of course, a deeper meaning. But here's the one I liked. Be the change you want to see today. Well, I was, and the change I want to see is exercise for less dropping their demand for biometrics. So if there is anybody watching this who is also a user of the exercise for less gyms, unless you've already committed and you've handed over your biometric data without thinking about it, then my counsel is it's time to go back to them and make it very clear that you're going to cancel your membership, because your $9.99 is your lost leader, because your biometric data is worth a lot more. And this is something from a little different, but this is what came to mind. The fingerprint scanner to spot the living dead. Well, in my opinion, if you've handed over your biometrics, then you're already part of the living dead. And by the way, that's exactly, of course, how the establishment treats you. Sestwi Kiwi, for those who were watching the last episode of Humanity versus Insanity, the fact that the establishment treat everybody as though they are dead. And as I stated last time, my goal is that sometime over the next decade or so, the comprehension of the Sestwi Kiwi fraud, or SETI-K, as the legal profession shorthands it, the SETI-K fraud of the British legal system, and people can see how they are effectively used, abused, and treated literally as cattle, more of which. Now, the other thing, Pippa, is that's very timely in our conversation is, of course, this article which appeared in the Mail on Sunday yesterday, October the 2nd of 2016. And here it is. This is a double-page spread. Inside China's Big Brother headquarters. And you see the text there. The cameras monitor millions of Britons. Its cameras, monitor millions of Britons. Now undercover, Mail on Sunday reporters infiltrate the nerve centre of a CCTV giant that spies on its own people to root out dissidents and has UK spooks very worried. Yeah, I bet it does. In reality, this is being presented as outrageous. This is something that happens in China. And the name of the company is really quite remarkable. It's Hikvision. Hikvision. Maybe they thought Goy Watch was a little bit too explicit. Well, Hikvision isn't far off the mark, of course. But Pippa, I sent you this article and the online link. What was your take when you read it?
I just thought, why aren't they writing an article about the systems we've got over here? This is, it's all right sort of pointing the finger at the Chinese and saying, isn't it dreadful? They've got facial detection, they've got cameras that can see in the dark, and they're monitoring their citizens. But the truth is, we've got Glasgow Smart City with a system just ready to go. And Edinburgh City Council are looking to install HD CCTV and roll that out all along the southwest of Scotland with facial detection software, sort of footfall monitoring, following people around the city using soft biometrics, which would be gait, or whether they're wearing clothes. And we've got a similar situation going on the Notting Hill Festival this year. We had live facial recognition, not facial detection. So facial detection is when the police can detect you for what you look like behind a camera, don't know who you are particularly, but then can track you across the city. Facial recognition is specifically where they have a database of photographs where they can refer to. And so I say, yes, this is Pippa King or this is Ian Crane, and follow you around knowing who you are. And this was rolled out at the Notting Hill Festival this year. And the Met Police gave a few days prior warning to the fact they were going to use this live recognition database and software, whereas the letter to police last year when they used it to download didn't, and it slipped out and they got a good hand slapping from the surveillance camera commissioner. But we don't know what system was used there. Pardon me. The Met Police. Have
you been in contact with Hillary Clinton recently?
No, I've been talking for the past 4 hours. I'm getting a bit of a dry throat. But we don't know what the system is that they're using there. I mean, the Met Police have a facial recognition system that they use on their custody suite photographs called Morpho, and we don't know if it was that one that was being used. But this sort of technology is being used in the UK, and we're sort of pointing the finger at China, saying, "Isn't it awful?" One thing that occurs to me is there's been no public debate about sort of facial recognition systems that are being used in the UK on the Police National Database and through CCTV, IPTV cameras in real time. There's been nothing that's come out of the Home Office on biometrics for the best part of 3 years. They are 2 years, 1 year, 18 months behind on a whole load of reports that they said they would supply to Parliament. And this is why there's been sort of no parliamentary debate, no public debate, because this technology is being quietly slipped in under everybody's radar. And the Home Office is simply kicking it into the long grass and saying, oh, it will produce reports, when they're ready, or we've had some publishing problems. And in due course seems to be a nice phrase that they like to wheel out. But in reality, I think I did send you a slide, but I'll just go through the reports that are overdue. I think there's 6 of them. There is the biometric strategy, report that was due end 15, end of last year, the custody suite retention report that was due at the end of last year. There's a trust framework that was due out in March this year. There was a biometric testing report that was due out by the Home Office, because the question was asked, do you test any of these systems? Are they robust? What's the false positive? What's the false negative? And the Home Office said, oh, we're doing a report on that. We'll bring it out by the end of 2015. There's a forensic policy group that meets, and biometrics is one of their remits, and they've been asked to make the minutes of their meetings public. The last minutes that were published were from October 2013. There's also the government's chief science advisor. His report in 2015 was due to come out, and that was meant to address biometrics and how the Home Office is using them, how different police forces are using them, and that report hasn't surfaced yet. So we've got 6 major reports due out of the Home Office on biometrics and how they're using them, how effective they are, how robust the systems are, and the Home Office hasn't produced one of them. So it's very concerning.
So the British government is very quiet on the situation. Meanwhile, let me actually refer to a couple of sections in the article from the Mail on Sunday. Hikvision is central to the government's Orwellian programme to spy on its 1.3 billion citizens and is inextricably linked to the totalitarian crackdown on those considered enemies of the state. More worryingly, Hikvision Vice President Pu Shiliang, who's the technical leader of a key laboratory at the Ministry of Public Security, the feared body that has been accused of the extrajudicial arrest and detention of thousands of lawyers, activists and perceived government opponents within China every year. Hikvision's high-tech CCTV systems can see in the dark, track vehicles and count the number of people entering and leaving a building, as well as boasting unparalleled face tracking technology. They even have the ability to identify a person by their gait. These capacities enable the Chinese authorities to track dissidents, activists and human rights campaigners who are routinely rounded up and detained. Last night, Lord West of Spithead, a security minister under Labour, said, "We know very well that the Chinese hack Western systems on a massive scale to get intellectual property, but this is even more worrying. If these cameras were in an office, they could see all the paperwork and get names of employees." And we're supposed to believe for 1 second that the British government and the British establishment wouldn't use this facility in the same way if they thought they could get away with it. The reality is, the only thing they're not doing right now is actually rounding up and detaining people en masse. They are doing it to individuals that they consider to be irritants, who they perceive they can effectively shut down, by making up false allegations and sort of putting them through a legal hell. The police do it by putting individuals who they think might be campaigners or protesters, by getting them on police bail and trying to effectively keep them away from areas where they might cause any problems. But to focus this article on China and try to say, oh my goodness me, look at how a totalitarian state monitors its citizens, and yet the UK is the most surveilled society outside probably of China. Or I would say that on a percentage basis, the UK is more heavily monitored than the 1.3 billion people in China. What do you think, Pippa?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the public space television that councils and police have access to is about 6 to 8% of the CCTV cameras we've got. The rest of it is private surveillance cameras. And, all I know is what software is potentially being run behind Glasgow, Edinburgh, Notting Hill festivals, etc. I have no idea what software is being run behind private surveillance systems. And certainly there's talk in America to use sort of emotional recognition software in schools to see if children are enjoying their lessons or not, that sort of thing. I mean, what's happening on a private level with the 90-odd% of the cameras that are being used, we have absolutely no idea whether facial recognition, facial detection is being used. Certainly the companies like NEC, the that supply Leicestershire Police with their facial recognition or facial detection, or it's recognition actually software, also supply private companies as well for security reasons. So it is worrying. We have absolutely no idea what's going on in the UK. All I can comment on is what's in the public arena, and I wouldn't imagine any private corporations are planning to make it public that they are using this type of software. Just going back to sort of the Fitbit thing, it's interesting because some private corporations in the States are wanting their employees to exercise. So it makes them more fit and their mind's alert. And people are having to do this, and that sort of data is going to corporations. So it's already happening in the States. And as I say, on this sort of level, I don't know in the UK whether that's happening, because I can only comment on what's in the public domain and what I can get from freedom of information requests, which isn't anything from private corporations, unfortunately. But it was. I read the article. I thought, well, they could have been talking about Glasgow.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because within the article, I mean, here's a graphic they use to show the Mail on Sunday reporters being shown around the Hikvision headquarters. And yet, here's a picture of the NICE monitoring centre in Glasgow. And I got to say that that versus that, I think we all know what's going on. I mean, the vast majority of people watching this programme, listening into this discussion, will know exactly what is going on in the UK. But the vast majority of people who are watching this, the vast majority are going to be in their 40s and older, because although there are exceptions, I am pleased to say, but it just seems that the vast majority of our youth are literally conditioned into accepting these invasions on their privacy as normal. And, it's the Big Brother psychology, isn't it? Big Brother has, for best part of 15 years now, given people the opportunity to drool over the goings-on of cameras in a house. And, it's almost like it's created this psychological acceptance of living one's life whilst under constant CCTV.
It's interesting about the next generation because they have been softened to the use of biometrics in schools. There's also a massive school data collection industry that's going on sort of commercially, but also the government has been collecting data on children through the school census for the past few decades. But
let's have a look at that, because you sent me a couple of slides on that.
Yeah, we have something in the UK called the National Pupil Database. It has over 20 million records on it, and they started collecting data in early 2000. So basically, if you were born sort of in the 1980s and you were sort of at any age sort of when in 2000 and you were still in the education system, there will be data on that database about you. Not very much, granted, but even so, there's going to be data on it. So so they've been collecting the data from 2 to 19-year-olds. There's now 20 million records on the database. The Department of Education have started collecting recently, in the past few years, 2-year-olds' early learning goals. So they decided in July 2012 that they had this massive data set, has been called one of the richest data sets of children globally, and they decided they were going to release data from it for researchers for free. They weren't going to make any charge. So there have been journalists, commercial companies, universities, healthcare, different companies, so basically this information can go out in a level of 3 tiers. Tier 4 is completely anonymous and aggregated research. Tier 1 is raw data with name, address, postcode, all your SEN needs. So the sort of things examples of data that the national...
SEN being special educational needs.
Special educational needs, yeah. It's a name, address, date of birth, your looked after status, so whether you're in care or with parents, whether you're in need, child protection, full ethnicity, language, special educational needs by type, the reasons for your absence and any exclusions. And this September, the Department of Education is requiring schools to get the country of birth and the main language spoken from all children in schools. Parents can refuse that, but the schools give it to them as much as the biometrics as a fait accompli. This is what you must give. Now, the parents don't get any sort of privacy notice or fair processing notice. The schools, quite a lot of schools, don't even know the National Pupil Database exists. They give their information onto the local authority, then it gets filtered through somewhere else, and and eventually it ends up in a charity called the Fisher Family Trust. And the Fisher Family Trust collates all this data and makes it into the National Pupil Database and gives it to the Department of Education. Now, of course, the Fisher Family Trust is nothing to do with the government at all. The Fisher Family Trust charity is owned by a company called RM Education. RM Education stands for Research Machines Education and was started up in the 1970s. They were the company that supplied all the BBC computers to schools in the late 1980s and early 1990s. They're a massive multi-million educational tech company. And of course, all the data they get filtered from every single school in the UK, they assimilate and they've got their own research arm of their charity that they're using to crunch this data and then go back to schools and say, well, look, obviously you need this sort of equipment for your school because they've had the data from the national, that's going to the national database, and they're using it commercially. Now, I was sort of aware of what was going on with the National Pupil Database in 2012. I was in touch with somebody at Privacy International, and we kept an eye on how the government or the Department of Education was handling the release of data. Unfortunately, it was something that I couldn't keep on top of. But fortunately for me, there was another mum got in touch with me about 2 years ago and said, have you heard of the National Pupil Database? And I went, yes, I don't know much about it. But so she took it upon herself to ask the primary school for a subject access request to see what information they were sending on to the National Pupil Database. And the primary school said, oh, we don't know what the National Pupil Database is, so we can't give you the subject access request. We don't know what's going onto the National Pupil Database. So this mother then went to the Department of Education and said to them, I want a subject access request on my child. I want to see what the data you've got on my child. And the Department of Education said, no, we're not going to give you that data. It's for research purposes only. So they use Section 33, Part 4 of the Data Protection Act, which makes if data is used for research, history, or statistics, the data controller who has the data doesn't have to give it up. So this poor mum had no idea what information the school or the government had on her child. So in the end, she did the paper trail and followed the data through to the Fisher Family Research charity owned by a multi-million pound educational tech corporation, and she asked them for the data. And because they weren't using it particularly for research or historical reasons, they actually gave her the data she wanted. So it's a poor state of affairs when the government will not release this data to you. Another thing as well on the National Pupil Database, they never delete the data. So this data keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And essentially it's compilation. They're compiling, in my eyes, it seems to me that they're compiling a national ID database. But of course, the one thing they need to make sure this data is absolutely pure will be in the long term a biometric identifier. So, and this is the school district in San Diego and Encinitas, I think, there was a big ed tech company that went and offered the school district a whole load of free iPads, but what was happening was every 60 seconds, the camera was taking a shot of or testing that the person that was sat in front of it should be the person that was there. In which case, if it was, then the data is great on that sort of person. And these computer programs could test how quickly, say, children were turning pages in the book, areas of mathematics that they weren't very good at. Maybe they were pausing a little bit at certain topics in science, so they weren't completing them as quickly. But they had to know it was that person, and that was the way that they did it. Now, the National Pupil Database, as far as I can tell, and I've never been able to prove this, that the fingerprints that have taken in schools have gone onto a national database at all. But the potential is there, absolutely, down the future to ensure the purity of the data on the database. It would be, I guess, a logical step for them to hook up kids' fingerprint alongside the data. So at the moment, this database is a standalone database. Normally, when researchers want to look at government data, they have to go to data centres. And in a data centre, for example, if you're looking at sensitive information, such as health records or anything like that, you have to go into a room and they will give you the computer. All you're allowed to take in is a pen and paper, no mobile telephone, no camera, no recording equipment. And you have to make notes from that. And then you leave the room, they check what you've written down, and then you walk away.
That's exactly like MEPs looking to try and get information on TTIP. And in the last episode, I showed the video of Luke Ming Flanagan, an Irish MEP, trying to get access to the TTIP documentation, and that's exactly the process that he went through.
So you'd have thought the National Pupil Database, with it having sensitive information of ethnicity, medical records, date of birth, address, age, you'd have thought that they'd apply that sort of criteria to the National Pupil Database. No. The Department of Education sees fit to email out data, and it's not even encrypted, in a raw form to people, and this is raw data, this is tier 1 data, to BBC Newsnight, Cabinet Office, Times journalist, Health and Social Care Corporation that did 300,000 surveys that they sent to children, a Telegraph journalist that got 10 million children's details, commercial educational tech companies and universities, and this data goes out raw. Your child's data could potentially be going anywhere. And because it's not encrypted, and because it's not used in a data center, those companies or those people could actually then pass that data on to somebody else. So once your child is in our education system, it's fair game for all their data, and there can be up to 400 fields of data against one child, and it's not all objective data. Simply, so it results for every key stage, the height and weight, the subjective fields as well in the database. And I know this because a parent whose child was fingerprinted at enrolment in his school in London moved to Scotland, and he asked the Scottish school, could he see the information that had come up with his daughter from the school in London? And part of that data was the fact that he was a problem parent, and they needed to sort of make sure he was all right or steer clear of him. And only because he'd objected to his child's fingerprint being taken. So because the Department of Education are squirming out of using Section 33 of the Act to sort of say, no, we can't give you any information, parents can't even check that the data about their children is correct or whether there's any data about them on them. And it's quite an outstanding, jaw-dropping state of affairs. But Jen, this mum, has done an amazing job. She's got the Defend Digital Me website, Ian. I don't know if you can put that slide up.
There it is.
Her website is an amazing source of information. So if you want to find out anything about that, please go and look at her website. We're in touch quite regularly.
So what is the website, Pippa?
It's defenddigitalme.com, and she's on Twitter as well. I'm not sure if she's got a Facebook page. I think she might have.
Twitter is @educationgovuk. Is that right?
It's not. I don't think that's Jen's. I think Jen's is at. Defend Digital.
Okay, but on the website is www.defenddigitalme. Okay, and that's where people can go and get information about the educational database. And I'm hoping that with your help, that Jen will be a future guest on Humanity versus Insanity, so she can share her insights into this insidious database. And what's interesting was a comment you made there, that the mere fact that a parent had the audacity to question why their child's fingerprints were being taken upon enrollment at school was then labelled a problem parent. So, once again, we're starting to see more of this state mentality, where anybody who dares to challenge the state dogma is effectively considered a dissident or a problem or a domestic extremist or worse.
Exactly. And I was talking to one of my friends about this database, and she's a midwife. and her youngest child has just started school. And she had a form to sign to consent for the height and weight of her child to be taken by the school and then processed onto whatever database that goes to. And she didn't consent. Within 10 minutes, the school nurse was on the phone to her, asking her whether she had any concerns about her child. Was the child underweight? Why did she not give her consent? And she just simply said, I don't want my child's details to be processed. I don't know where they're going to go. So you're not having it. And I don't think the school had ever, it had ever even occurred to the school that parents have this concern. Well, most parents don't have the concern because the schools aren't telling them what they're doing with the data. And in most circumstances, schools don't know where their data is going. They just do their job, pass it on to whoever takes the data off them, the local authority, and then that's not their worry. To be fair, schools have got an awful big job to do without worrying about where the data is going. But it then gets filtered through. I mean, in fact, myself and Jen have tried to find the actual route and of how many organisations children's data goes through before it lands on the Fisher Family Trust's big database and then presented to the Department of Education. And then from there, it can go unencrypted via email to anybody that asks, it seems.
Incredible. Now, Pippa, just moving on from that, and I want to just go back because I do have this slide. This was the slide, and this links into my next point here. These are all the reports that you went through earlier, which have been due but have not been published. Biometric strategy, custody suite retention of photographs, trust framework, Home Office report on biometric testing accuracy, forensic policy group minutes, and the government's chief scientific advisor's 2015 annual report, none of which have been produced. Coupled with which, you, of course, are extremely tenacious in trying to access information that you know exists, but isn't readily put in the public domain, but should be accessible via freedom of information request. And your track record, unfortunately, is somewhat knocked back by this constant refusal to respond, and an open refusal, not just an obfuscation, not just a kick in the can down the road, an out-and-out refusal. So just talk us through these freedom of information requests that you've submitted.
I think we talked about the millimeter microwave technology on the last time I was on.
Yeah, this is the MITRE, yes.
Yeah.
Myrtle, sorry.
Yeah, Myrtle, that's right. For anybody that didn't sort of hear that, so there's a company called Radio Physics Solutions that has developed a millimeter microwave, which is 75 to 110 gigahertz radio wavelength, and they can sort of project this. They have a sort of a beam machine, effectively, that projects this radio frequency onto crowds of people or individual people, and it will identify whether or not they've got a gun-shaped object on them or some sort of a bomb vest on them. Essentially, it's the same technology that's used in TSA scanners in New York, in the States, but they're looking to test it in whatever capacity. The Met Police are involved with this, and that was what this Freedom of Information request was about, and that they've refused under the grounds of national security. Radio Physics Solutions are teaming up with Sequester, which is a company which has actually been launched this week. It's got official launch. You go to their website on the 6th of October. For the past year or two, they've been basically searching around for money to start up the company, but Sequester purports to make all dumb CCTV smart. So I was talking earlier about public space CCTV being 6 to 8% of the CCTV we've got. This company is coming to the police and saying, oh, you know, all that private surveillance tape that you haven't got access to, we can amalgamate the whole of it, make it into a smart system and start to run things like facial detection, soft biometric tracking, exactly the same thing that the Chinese company is saying it can do. And this is potentially quite dangerous. Well, it is especially if they're hooking up with radio physics solutions. So you could potentially have a CCTV camera that can go one step further than the Chinese. It can facially detect you, but at the same point in time, it can also check whether or not you've got a gun-shaped object or a suicide vest on. And I think I'd said this last time I was on, I just think, where's this going to stop? Are they going to put this radio physics solutions technology onto ANPR cameras? Will it be built into lampposts? Effectively, that technology will, if it's going ahead, I don't know, because my freedom of information request has been refused, it will disarm the whole of the population of this country, full stop. Which, maybe isn't such a bad thing, but it will stop us forever, ever having a dissent, or, the Berlin Wall coming down, or apartheid in South Africa happening. It's a very dangerous and now unknown route that we don't know where our police is going with this. And this is a technology that's not used anywhere else in the world at all. Again, us British citizens are the first people, as were our children in schools with biometrics, to be subjected to this millimetre microwave technology. Interestingly enough, both Sequester and Radio Physics Solutions are owned by a company called Anglo Scientific, which is an equities company, basically. So they see companies with good ideas and pump money into them, and this is how these two are sort of intertwined. So there's a pair. They present themselves to the police and security services as a fait accompli, and we have no idea now what's going to happen with it. So my next step is to go to the Information Commissioner's office and a couple of sympathetic MPs that are going to start asking questions in Parliament, hopefully.
Well, Pippa, we're out of time. What we will do is the video. This is the Myrtle Critical Advances in Detection. It's a product video, actually put up on YouTube by Myrtle. And we'll actually put the link to that in the YouTube notes accompanying this program. So, Pippa, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And, well, here we are in the Stasi state UK. The only reason that we're not being rounded up yet is because they haven't actually got the legislation in place to be able to do it. But there's little doubt that, unfortunately, the UK is heading into a total police-controlled state, a corporate police state. But of course, that's not definitive, because if we, the collective we, actually stand up, as we have done on a number of occasions in the past, and say, you know what, this isn't going to happen, and hopefully this creeping, insidious technology that's being imposed to deprive individuals, families, and groups of their personal freedom will be shut down. The alternative doesn't bear thinking about. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you very much, Pippa, for joining me. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. And I will see you next week with Humanity vs. Insanity. Well, we'll be taking a look at the elements of the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster that have been conveniently omitted from the current movie that is making the rounds. It had a budget of £156 million. Is it a PR product to misdirect people away from the real issues? See you next week.